enforce it, you're actually going to just lead to people not hiring because you're going to set them up for failure. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose did the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
As best as I'm able to determine, this is a bipartisan vote of the Equal Opportunity and Employment Commission. Just saying that there should be reasonableness in the process of looking at this question. We have a lot of young people who get themselves involved in circumstances at early points in their lives, but we do want them to be gainful, employed, and productive citizens in our various states. But nonetheless, this is a matter that has been litigated in various courts, and to some degree I think it's helped to bring a more common sense approach to this process. But here again, to deny funds for the lawyers of the federal government to be able to handle these matters in a court of law, I don't believe is the appropriate way to go. So I stand in opposition to this amendment, and I stand for the notion that we should be trying to re-engage people in productive lives, in employment, reunite them with their families, and build stronger communities. And I think that's the purpose of much of the work that we're doing related to reentry. So I thank you, and I yield back.
And the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado, what purpose do you rise?
Strike the last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
And I would like to yield my time to the gentleman from Arizona.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I do agree with the gentleman from Pennsylvania that we need to have people. We need to make sure that we are allowing people to get good jobs, and that's the biggest problem that I have with this guidance, is that when you're setting up other companies to where they have a lose-lose proposition of whether they're going to either have the possibility of litigation from the federal government or the possibility of litigation because they have a negligent hiring, you're actually setting up a situation where they just won't hire. They won't hire anybody because they're not going to want to put themselves in that situation. And the other thing that we've been seeing is that this got a lot of concern from the Appropriations Committee in the Senate as well, saying that we have to look and make sure that there are not these unintended consequences where we're going to be putting up businesses to fail, and that we're actually putting on these burdens that are not going to let companies expand, they're not going to let companies hire, and these are the sorts of things that continue to put this uncertainty in the private sector. And it seems day in and day out is that the federal government does this, whether it's an agency or commission. And that's why I think this is a very important amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Yes. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I rise today to engage in a colloquy with the chairman of the Commerce, Justice, Science Committee regarding NASA's plans to consolidate its thermal protection systems and atmospheric reentry materials testing facilities known as ArcJet facilities. In 2011, NASA made the decision to close the ArcJet facility at the Johnson Space Center in order to consolidate testing in a single NASA location. However, serious concerns were raised at high levels within NASA and industry about the detrimental effects this consolidation will have on NASA's testing capabilities, its ability to maintain unique institutional assets, and its ability to successfully develop NASA's human and robotic space systems, including the Orion, commercial, and other important space vehicles, which all require ArcJet certification of their thermal protection systems. Madam Chair, NASA claims that the proposed consolidation will reduce costs while maintaining safety and mission assurance. However, I believe that NASA has unduly fast-tracked this decision and overlooked safety and mission concerns, cost issues, and program testing needs. I've asked NASA to suspend its work on closing the ArcJet, pending a thorough and independent review of those concerns, such as an investigation by the NASA Inspector General and the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. I hope that such review will ensure that NASA does not make a short-sighted and regretful decision. I thank Chairman Wolf for the opportunity to raise these concerns today. I yield to my colleague from Texas, Mr. Green.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for yielding me time, and I want to thank Chairman Wolf for his tireless dedication to maintaining our nation's manned space flight capabilities. For many years we worked together. I represent part of Houston and Pasadena, Texas, and we're proud of the Johnson Space Center. The work that is accomplished there advances our nation in space through mission control, training, and testing. One such testing facility is ArcJet. This facility ensures that the material on the outside of the vehicles re-entering our atmosphere can withstand the heat that is created. It's a critical capability if we ever want to send humans in space again. The Joint Johnson Space Center ArcJet facility is being closed by NASA. I believe the decision is premature. We've received documentation indicating the experts within NASA from their own Office of Safety and Mission Assurance believe that the closure would negligently impact the safety and diminish NASA's in-house testing capabilities. Confronted with tough questions on this, NASA has decided to move ahead with their plans. They're unwilling to delay it, and they are even unwilling to further study it. Chairman Wolf, I'm asking for your help as we're confronted with a NASA that is pushing ahead despite our inquiries and despite their own internal disagreements. This is not just a local issue, and I'm afraid that the closure of ArcJet as Johnson Space Center would forever undermine our nation's space program, and I appreciate any assistance you could provide us.
The gentleman would yield.
Reclaim my time. I'll now yield to Chairman, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Mr. Green, I want to thank both of you for your commitment to safety and mission success at NASA. This is an issue that they have been active on for a while now, and they have raised a number of significant questions. And we will be happy to work with both of your offices to ensure that those questions are answered and that decision-making on NASA's facilities promotes safe and effective management. And so we'll work with both of you to do that. And yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Thank you. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garrett of New Jersey. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Department of Justice to be a party to a single or multi-state court settlement where funds are removed from any residential mortgage-backed securitization trust.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I thank the Chair. So earlier this year, the Obama administration and the state attorney generals across this country entered into a so-called multi-state mortgage settlement process and a final settlement with some of the nation's largest servicers. Now, what the administration stated at this time, that the settlement would require the servicers to use, and this is important, their own money to help people, to help pay out overextended home buyers, basically. Unfortunately, this settlement went a lot further than that. In that settlement, people who are purely investors in mortgage-backed securities were also negatively affected by it as well. You might say literally taking money from them or stealing money from them through this process. You see, these private investors, they did absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever, but now they also are on the hook of having to pay, well, upwards to billions of dollars to, again, bail out some people who made some bad decisions and wrong investments. Now, I do very much sympathize with people, individuals, home buyers who were hard hit by the recession, and I understand what the intention of this settlement process was, but there's no reason whatsoever why private investors who fund our mortgage market in this country should have their private contracts broken and their money basically taken from them. See, They, in this process, were deliberately left out entirely of the administration negotiations on the mortgage settlement. They did not have a proverbial seat at the table when the decision was made as to who would foot the bill. Basically, private contracts in the process were broken. People, investors, didn't have a chance to stop it. They didn't have a say. Now, who are these investors that I'm talking about here? They're state retirement systems, they're 401k plans, they're public pension plans, they're private pension plans, they're insurance company annuities, they're mutual funds. Basically what I'm talking about is just regular everyday people. These are that comprise the majority of American retirees across this country. So in addition to the DOJ taking this action and this past settlement practice, without the investors saying present, not them at the table, this is really, if you think about it, another example of private contract rights having been broken and Fifth Amendment due process rights having been broken as well. Now, this is all in the past. What we're doing here is in this legislation is going forward. But what past action, if it is able to be continued, would put a hesitancy, if you will, would encourage investors to step back from the mortgage market and say, you know, there's really a new political risk here if I'm going to invest in mortgages anymore, if I'm going to buy a mortgage bond or what have you, and they will step back from doing so. And that will hurt everyone. That will hurt you and I, and that will hurt your neighbors who want to get a mortgage in the future because there will not be investors who want to lend the money. And what that will do is, of course, drive up the cost of borrowing. That will drive up the cost of buying a new home. And that, of course, is something that we do not want to do here. So having the government basically taking money out of pension funds, taking money from retirees is not something that we should allow to occur going forward, and that basically is what our amendment tries to do, prohibit the DOJ from keeping these people from being at the table in any further settlement negotiations like this. With that, I would yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I rise to strike the last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I think the House it would be useful to understand that dozens and dozens, in fact the majority, bipartisan attorney generals across the country filed litigation against mortgage investors who had, in their view, improperly led to millions of foreclosures throughout the country as we saw the housing market collapse. This was joined in by the Obama administration. A settlement emerged. That settlement this week led to, for instance, for 200,000 homeowners to have their principals reduced this week. But this is actions that are taking place all across the country over multiple steps, and millions of families will benefit. The gentleman's amendment says that the people who invested in the mortgage-backed securities, these are the entities that then hire the servicers who were found to have violated the law by improperly conducting their affairs. So they settled with Democrats and Republican attorney generals across the country in a $25 billion plus settlement that is trying to right a wrong. This amendment says, well, somehow you can't hold the people who are the investors liable for their agent, the servicers, the agents who artificially sign people's names to documents and on and on and on. I won't recount the activities because I think they're known well. But more importantly, they really harm the entire housing market in our nation. I think the attempt here to separate out those who are seeking a fortune off of the misfortune of others from those who acted on their behalf is wrong-headed, and I think that the amendment should be voted down. This, unlike many others, is not a partisan matter. This is something that was brought by Republican attorney generals across in our states and Democrat attorney generals. And the joining in of it by the Department of Justice and the Obama administration was just icing on the cake. But I think that the point here is that this is an activity of our state governments, and there's no reason why we should be using the process here on an appropriations bill to interfere in it. And I'm not at all certain that this would not have impacts, because there are still other issues that are being proceeded in terms of banks in this regard. This was just with the largest banks in the country. So I think this amendment could have impacts and could harm the efforts of homeowners in our states to seek redress. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment. Oh, sorry. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And with that, I'd like to yield to my chairman from New Jersey.
And I appreciate the yield, and I'll just be very brief on this. I very much appreciate the fact that the settlement was done in a bipartisan manner. I very much appreciate the fact what the overall intent of the settlement efforts were by the administration and the State Attorney General. We're not questioning that at all. Very interesting analogy that you make as far as the servicers being the agent of the investors. But remember who are you talking about, who those investors are. They are the pension funds in your district. They are the unions in your district who have their pension funds invested in mortgage-backed securities. They're the retirees in your district who went and through a mutual fund or some other sort of fund bought an investment, a bond or what have you, that was in mortgage-backed securities. Now, yes, now a third party, if you will, another party, the servicers, made some bad decisions in this. But the way this works is that the State Attorney Generals and the DOJ went after who? Basically about the 4 or 5 largest banks, about 20% of the industry, figuring that they would be the best target to go after. Fine, you can narrow it down who you're going to go after. Now you give it in their discretion as to which mortgages that they're going to write down. I'm going to write down this one, I'm going to write down this one. Which ones am I going to basically help out through bailing out the home buyers? Yes, a large percentage of those are on their own books, but some of them are not on their own books. Some of them are the servicers for other investors that are out there. So which ones do you think the banks are going to look at first as far as taking a haircut from? Something that's in their own portfolio, something that is going to be negative to them, or something that's out there extraneous, out to maybe one of your own pension funds out there? I would gather that most likely they will go outside of their own personal or business financial decision and go outside and say, let's look at some of these other investors instead. So that's who we're trying to protect. And at the end of the day, it's a very simple thing. If this were to go forward, really all you really want to make sure is that those people, innocent and otherwise, to be able to have a seat at the table and make sure that their rights and interests are protected as well. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman who will.
And Madam Chairman, I yield back to you.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Thank you. Oh.
Right. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Schweikert of Arizona. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used by the Department of Justice to bring any action against any state for implementation of a state law requiring voter identification.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairwoman, I think you're probably, and all of us in the body are noticing a theme here on many of these limitation amendments. And being someone who comes from Arizona, there's a reason we've been actually applauding many of these amendments. We feel as a state, and now I'm realizing many other states have the same issue, where we feel we're at battle with our own Justice Department. How many times has Arizona now been sued by this Justice Department? So this became one of those occasions where we understand Texas and other states are now being sued by the Justice Department because of voter ID laws. All right, I'm tired of this, and I think the American people are tired of there being this battle between the federal government suing our states and costing the residents, the citizens of our states, these litigation costs. So how do you stand up and create limitation? Well, this became our opportunity to tell the Justice Department saying, go after bad guys, stop suing our states. If there's a bad act and requiring an ID to vote in a state, fine, you still have private rights of action. But in this case, and I had a staffer in the back telling me the story, and I hope I don't screw this up too much, but apparently a couple of weeks ago, there was a young man who walked into a polling place and was able to get general holders or attorney general's ballot by just saying, hi, I'm Eric Holder, but I'm here to vote. Well, does anyone understand how absurdly ironic this is when considering you can't go in and visit the Attorney General in his office without a photo ID? So I can't go visit him at his office, but I can walk in and get his ballot? Look, if you believe in the sanctity of the voting box, if you want the American people to believe in your elections and be willing to accept when there's changes of power, which happens all the time, you've got to also have that faith, the faith that those elections were clean and proper, but also that those who were supposed to vote were the ones who were allowed to vote. And that's, Madam Chairman, that's why I stand here and offer this amendment. And with that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Iowa.
Madam Chairman, I move strike
What
last
purpose
word.
do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of the Schweikert amendment, and as I listened to his presentation, it rolls me back to the year 2000 when I watched the fiasco take place in Florida and the recount that took place there. And at the time I was chairman of the Iowa Senate State Government Committee. It was my job to see to it that we made sure that Iowa wasn't a Florida in a recount like that. And in that process, I went through 37 days where almost every waking minute I was looking into voter and election fraud. It really brought my attention to it, to the point where every day I carry an acorn around in my pocket just to remind me that free and fair and legitimate elections are what we need to have. It's the very bedrock for this constitutional republic. The Constitution is the foundation, but legitimate elections and the perception of legitimate elections are the very bedrock upon which the foundation of our country sets upon. And so through that period of time, we've watched since as there's been more and more election fraud promoted by Acorn that brought this to the public's eye, but it's something that I've been on now into my 12th year. And as I look at some of the and as I brought legislation in the state forward to legitimize the elections that were in question, I asked that we have made sure that our voter registrations lists are free of duplicates, deceased, and felons, and that we require a picture ID. And the gentleman from Arizona has put together a list of the things that you need a picture ID for, and it's rather astonishing when you look through that list. And since he'd yielded back the balance of his time, I'm going to just pick some things off of this sheet, Madam Chair, and that is this. You can't get a package from a post office general delivery box without showing a picture ID. In cities, I can in my hometown. And you can't purchase a handgun without a picture ID. You can't purchase tobacco or liquor without a picture ID. I can't get a beer in Chicago without a picture ID, or open a bank account, or get on a passenger plane, or get a ticket to Amtrak, or rent a car, or return merchandise for a refund, or sell scrap metal in a junkyard, or purchase police uniforms in California. I've never tried that one. It can't be treated in many doctor's offices or admitted to a hospital without being an emergency without a picture ID, or rent an apartment, or open a bank, get a bank loan, or a cell phone, or a teaching license, or enter a major university, enroll as a student, or a library card in many libraries, or enter military forts, check into a major hotel chain, rent a truck from a U-Haul, or, as the gentleman from Arizona said, you can't visit Eric Holder without a picture ID. Pretty astonishing this morning in a hearing before the Judiciary Committee, the director of the FBI, Director Mueller, I asked him the question if he had heard of the incident of the early 20s a young Caucasian male that walked into the polling place in Virginia and asked for Attorney General Eric Holder's ballot. And he just gave the name and identified the address, and they tried to hand him the ballot, and he said, I need to go get my ID. You don't need an ID. Here's the ballot. It didn't occur to the poll worker that this early 20s Caucasian male was not a 61-year-old black man whom everybody ought to know his face by now, the Attorney General of the United States. The Attorney General of the United States wasn't apparently alarmed that he could easily have been disenfranchised of his vote if that individual had just picked up the ballot and gone and voted. Not alarmed. And the director of the FBI said, under oath this morning, he hadn't heard of this case, this incident, that, by the way, twice was brought before the Judiciary Committee, and the video was run, and it's a matter of record, the Judiciary Committee, within the last month, Madam Chair. So this is something that there are things that you can't do, and there's things that you can't do, and I said you can't get a beer in Chicago without a picture ID. You can't vote in Hugo Chavez's Venezuela without a picture ID. It's about time in the United States of America we allowed the states to clean up our election laws and kept the Department of Justice out of the business of interfering with the justice that's delivered by the states of the United States of America. And I'd yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
And let me say a couple of things. One is that our country's managed to limp along for a few hundred years. We're the leading nation in the world. We're the wealthiest nation in the world. We're the #1 superpower. I don't know how we got here with all of these imperfections in our voting system, but we'll try to go forward. This notion that voter IDs, for instance, in the state of Texas, if you have a concealed weapons permit issued by the state, that's good. You can go vote with it. If you have a state ID from the state university, that's not good. In our state of Pennsylvania, we got 30 different types of IDs that you can and you can't use. The Republican governors and legislatures throughout our country this year have all come to the same conclusion. It's like a consensus that all of a sudden what America really needs is picture IDs for people to go vote. I would suspect that when this is over with, after people go to the polls in November, there's going to be some regret. I think that in many areas of our country where there are people who may even cast votes on behalf of the GOP, that they're going to be senior citizens. Like, for instance, let me give you an example of my own mother. She's 80 years old. She's never driven a car. She's not traveled outside the country. She has no active passport or anything. She doesn't have a picture ID, doesn't need one. Now, we'll make sure she has one. And I believe that when we get to the final analysis here, that there will be more interference in voting in places that don't have the same level of access to what the states have now required you to do. And I think that'll be unfortunate. It's not the way for the leading democracy in the world to operate. Those who have promoted these laws and stand in support of them, I believe this will be a point in their careers that they'll look back on and wonder how it is they got on such the wrong side of history. I'm opposed to this amendment, which is another limiting amendment, limiting access to the courts for lawyers on behalf of our government, trying to protect citizens' right to vote in states where governors have decided now you need a picture to go present yourself to cast a ballot. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose
I wish to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm proud of my colleague from Arizona from bringing up this amendment, and I'm tired of the Department of Justice dictating to the states. It's about time that we embellished and supported states to actually help us with this. And I want to remind our colleagues, you know, if it's good enough for us, here's my card in order to vote, it should be good enough for the rest of the United States. What we do in Congress, we should do for the rest of the country, and this is where it starts. You know, there are so many things that we can talk about, but it's about time that we stop suing states, and I think this is a great amendment, rewarding good behavior instead of rewarding bad behavior, and give our Department of Justice some outlines of what good behavior is, because I think they've lost their way. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Madam Chair, on that I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I have a amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment. Will the gentleman specify which amendment you have two at the desk?
By myself, Mr. Gowdy of South Carolina, Mr. King of Iowa, Mr. Scalise of Louisiana, and Mr. Landry of Louisiana.
Thank you. The clerk will report. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Poe of Texas.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, my colleagues and I, Congressman Gowdy, Congressman King, Congressman Scalise, and Congressman Landry, have introduced an amendment to prohibit funds from going to the Census Bureau to enforce a criminal penalty that is imposed on people who choose not to complete the American Community Survey. The American Community Survey is not the same as the annual or every 10-year census that is required by the U.S. Constitution. The census, of course, is conducted every 10 years to count the population and includes basically 10 questions. The American Community Survey is a different survey handled by the Census Bureau that has 48 questions that's sent to 250,000 people every month, or 3 million Americans a year. The questions that it asks have nothing to do with national security, but it asks specific, in my opinion, intrusive questions to determine federal funding for certain areas, plus businesses use these answers to the question to make business decisions on locating or not locating in certain parts of the United States. I don't argue the benefit of the overall purpose of the American Community Survey. My concern is that it's intrusive, and does the federal government really have the right to ask certain questions? There are 48. I'm not going to go through all of them. However, I'd like unanimous consent to put into the record the American Community Survey.
The request will be put into the record.
3 questions I'd like to mention, however. One of them is, does your home have a flush toilet? Or do you or any member of your household have a second mortgage or home equity loan? The third question I wanted to mention was, the person filling out the form is asked this question: because of a physical, mental, or emotional condition, does a person in the residence have serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions? Now, does the federal government really need this information? Should the federal government really obtain this information, this intrusive information, from citizens? If Americans want to complete the American Community Survey, fill it out, give it to the Census Bureau, fine. But they shouldn't be required to do so with the threat of a fine. I've heard from many people, not only in Texas but all over the country, that they are concerned when people come from the Census Bureau or subcontractors to have them fill out this questionnaire. People from the Census Bureau are contracted by them. They start with phone calls. First there's one a week, and then many times there's one every day. In one particular case, I had an individual who is a single mother with a young child, said the Census Bureau worker started coming to her house, sitting out in the front of her house waiting for her to come in. And then when she's in the residence, the worker is peeking through the window to see if she's in there, knocking on the door to have her come to the door to answer the American Community Survey. Now, Does that really need to take place in the United States to just get a 48-question survey filled out? I don't think so. The means to get this information does not justify the result. And if people don't want to complete the survey, they shouldn't be required under our law by penalty of a fine to do so. I hope that we do in this country as the Canadians have done. They've made this type of information voluntary. They still obtain the information from people who want to voluntarily give the information. As smart as the Census Bureau is about collecting information, they can certainly do this without having to go door to door, 250,000 people every quarter or every month to do this. Figure out new innovative ways to obtain this information voluntarily. Maybe talk to some of the polling agencies that have specific information about all kinds of polls in the United States to obtain the information with the result to be for businesses to use and for federal funding to be going into those areas. So this amendment simply says there will be no penalty for people who refuse to fill out the survey. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized 5 minutes.
My colleague, the gentleman from Texas, was here with I was here with him in 2005. In fact, we had a president from Texas. This survey was done then. It was done in the same identical way. In fact, this would be the first time that we would act in a way contrary to our constitutional responsibilities. It's important to note that this is an authorized activity of the Census Bureau, not just directly related to our constitutional responsibilities, but also Title 13 of the U.S. Code. And it has been judged in numerous courts to be appropriate. It is important for Congress and for our government to be able to act in ways in terms of public policy that we have information. I'm trying to figure out what's different now than 2005. In fact, the development of this survey in these questions even happened prior to this administration. So I'm trying to figure out exactly why we're here today and what it is that we're trying to accomplish and why we want to create suspicion about the fact that we need to have information about the population, like the question about toilets that flush or things like this. We do this with the Millennium Challenge Grant, which was set up under the Bush administration, in looking at developing countries and looking at some of the challenges in terms of population. And wouldn't we want to know about the state of our own communities? So I wonder why we're here. I do know one thing. I'm going to vote against this. I'm sure the gentleman has some reason why this was okay before and now it's not okay, and the House will work its will on it, but I oppose it. I'll be glad to yield. Yes.
To answer your question specifically, I am not arguing the point that this information is not valuable for businesses and for the federal government for funding in certain areas. My issue and the concern that has arisen since I have been in Congress is that people feel that they should not be forced to participate in the American Community Survey. This is not the census. This is a different, complete document. Sure, authorized by Congress, but maybe Congress needs to back up and say people should be allowed to opt out and not be required to fill out the survey, and let the Census Bureau...
Well, reclaiming my time, maybe Congress will, and you've offered us an opportunity to do so. And you point out that Canada, I guess you're recommending their system, the way they do things. But for our purposes, the country seems to have run pretty well by getting the census data, having a capability of understanding what the water needs may be, what the transportation needs may be, understanding what the conditions of in American families so that we can set appropriate public policy. But if you think we can do that better being in the dark in terms of this data, fine. The Census Bureau says even though they don't really enforce the fine, they know with a certainty, absent a requirement, they will get less data back. So I would yield back the balance of my time. I know the gentleman is attempting to help our country. I'm just not clear exactly how this does it. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of the Poe Amendment, and I thank the gentleman from Texas for bringing it. Just to clarify some of the history, this is the questionnaire that apparently has replaced the need for what was the census long form. For years, the census, of course, is directed by the Constitution every 10 years, and that's why we're going through redistricting now and all the primaries that take place across the country. But since 1940, from 1940 until the year 2000, we also had the long form that was part of the census question. Some people got the long form, some got the short form. And this questionnaire came along and replaced the long form, so the perception was that it actually was a census question, so the replacement for the long form, but it really is not. Of course, it's the American Community Survey. And I agree with the gentleman from Texas. If a government is going to be so intrusive that they're going to issue a 24-page packet of questions that's got 48 questions in it, some of them very, very intrusive, just names, age, gender, race, income, physical and emotional health. That must have been the one where you have to answer the question on whether you're having trouble concentrating or making decisions. Your family status, details of your residence. That might be the one about whether you have a flush toilet or not. And intimate personal habits, I'm not be the one about whether you actually use it or not. I'm having trouble concentrating on whether actually I have one. But I'm thinking that when one gets one of these in the mail, and you're looking at someplace between, I know it's not been enforced, but they don't know that when they get the questionnaire. So someplace between a $100 fine and up to a $5,000 fine by the information that I have. That's pretty draconian just to get information from an American people that volunteer on a daily basis by the tens of millions and contribute billions of dollars in charity. We can find enough Americans to fill out this survey and give the government the information that they need. Yes, I'd yield.
There's some 309 million Americans, and some 200,000 will be getting this form, right?
250, I believe, is the number I have.
250,000. So first and foremost, it's an opportunity for a sampling, and as politicians we know what sampling is all about. It is to take from a smaller group of people information that you can then extrapolate and to make broader judgments about, right? So if you're only asking less than 1% of 1%, a notion that this is some intrusive governmental activity, I think.
Well, reclaiming my time, I would make the point that, Madam Chair, I'd make the point that if it's less than 1% of the population, it certainly is. It's far less than 1% of the population. We can find that many volunteers that will fill this out voluntarily. Send it to me. I'll fill it out voluntarily. But when you tell me you're going to come in and fine me for it, that's too intrusive. And these questions are personal enough that people should be able to say, I don't want to share that information with my federal government. I don't want that to go into a database that might possibly get transferred across into other people's information. I think it's important to have the information, but it's important that people have freedom and liberty, and we do not have an intrusive federal government that would impose a fine on people if they didn't let the information come out about whether they had a flush toilet and whether they could concentrate on whether they had it and whether they used it. That seems to be part of the center of this. We could at least reduce some of these questions down here. But
for 10 seconds. Obviously, it will be a different population if one were asked to volunteer versus one selected through a random sample. I'd yield back your time.
And I'd reclaim it, and I recognize that, but I think that we get better information from volunteers than we do people that are coerced. They may well not fill out this survey accurately if they think they're done so under penalty of law. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank Madam Chairwoman. Madam Chairwoman, if the government wants to ask you if you're having trouble keeping your attention or how many flush toilets you have, I suppose they can ask that, but should they really be able to fine you for not answering? And it is of very little comfort to us that the government has seen fit to not enforce that fine. To threaten somebody with the administration of a fine and then never to carry through on it sounds eerily similar to me, Madam Chairwoman, to blackmail. I mean, what's the purpose of putting it on there if you're never going to enforce it? And if you can do it to 250,000 this time, what's to keep you from doing it 500,000 next time and then 1 million? The purpose of the census, Madam Chairwoman, is to apportion the several congressional districts. So what do you need to know to be able to apportion the several congressional districts? You need to know how many people of voting age are in a household. You need to know race so you can comport with constitutional provisions. You may very well need to know the gender of the people in the home so you can comport with constitutional provisions, but you don't need to know anything beyond that. What I find ironic, when we had a subcommittee hearing on this, Madam Chairwoman, and what I find to be ironic, and I never got an answer to it, is this. You don't have to vote. Government can't do a single solitary thing to you if you don't vote. They can't fine you. They can't put you in jail. But somehow or another, they can if you fail to fill out the document that apportions the congressional districts so you can vote. That is tortured logic. And I would say this, in conclusion, Madam Chairwoman, if you want to ask about anything other than how many people live here, race and sex, it's none of the government's business. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Madam Chairwoman, would do it?
Does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? You just not sure.
No, ma'am. I apologize. Thank you.
Does anyone seek recognition? Does anyone seek recognition? The gentleman from Florida. For what purpose does he rise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Webster of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to conduct the survey conducted by the Secretary of Commerce, commonly referred to as the American Community Survey.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment offered here by myself and Mr. Langford is simple. It prohibits taxpayer funds from being used to conduct the intrusive, unconstitutional American Community Survey. In addition to the constitutionally mandated census, Department of Commerce Census Bureau conducts a number of other surveys. One of these is the American Community Survey, which costs $2.4 billion to administer. Some of the questions, which have already been gone over, the American Community Survey contains, have been routinely criticized as invasions of privacy. As a citizen who has normal expectations of what is private and what is not private, I share that criticism. For example, the survey requires respondents to detail their emotional condition. The survey wants to know what time respondents left for work and how long it took them to get home. The survey demands that they know what respondents have difficulty, if they have difficulty dressing, or they need to go, need to go shopping, or have difficulty, as has been said before, concentrating, or remembering, or making decisions. Failure to comply with this survey and turn over this personal information is punishable by up to a $5,000 fine. Given the intrusive nature of some of these questions, which are mandatory for Americans to answer under penalty of law, it would seem that these questions hardly fit the scope of what was intended or required by the Constitution. What does the Constitution require? Article 1, Section 2 calls for enumeration every 10 years. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress of the United States and within 10 subsequent term of 10 years. As you can see, there's no point at no point does the Constitution require me to tell the Census Bureau whether I have difficulty concentrating or whether or not I can climb stairs. Given the nation's current fiscal situation, it is entirely appropriate to eliminate the survey as a taxpayer-funded activity of the U.S. government. The American taxpayers agree. I sponsored the Majority Leader's You Cut program this past week, and eliminating the American Community Survey was overwhelmingly the winner when the citizens were polled what federal spending they would cut. We need to ask ourselves whether this survey is worth $2.4 billion. Will continuation of this survey bankrupt the nation itself? No, not hardly. But, as been said before, the old saying is $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and all of a sudden we're talking about a lot of money. Why would we even pass a cyber security bill when we are using 5,779 hired government agents to collect sensitive information from our citizens at taxpayer expense? This American Community Survey is an inappropriate use of taxpayer dollars. It is the very picture of what's wrong in D.C. I have here the questionnaire. At least it'd be the questionnaire if Daniel Webster and Sandra and David and Brent and Jordan and Elizabeth and John and Victoria were all questioned. This is the size of that questionnaire. This is what we would have to fill out. This was what would be punishable by law if we did not fill it out. What would you think about some of these others you read about in the newspaper? The Duggar family who have 20 children. What would they do? It would be 3 to 4 times this size, and they would be required by law to fill it out. This survey is inappropriate for taxpayer dollars. It's a definition of the breach of personal privacy. It's a picture of what's wrong in Washington, D.C. It's unconstitutional. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the Webster-Langford Amendment and prohibit funds from being used to conduct this American Community Survey. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma? Oh, Pennsylvania, I'm sorry. Excuse me, sir.
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
So we first had an amendment to say we can't require people with a fine that's never enforced. Now we have an amendment that says you can't do the survey at all. We've been doing surveys in the long form since 1790 as a nation. It's critically important. Let me give you, for instance, the gentleman who just spoke, my good friend from Florida, who served as Speaker and as leader in the, both the House and Senate there respectively. We're spending $200 billion a year on Alzheimer's alone. There are various forms of dementia as our populations age. Pennsylvania being the second state in the country in terms of aging population, it's important for us to know if, unlike what was stated, the survey doesn't ask you whether you are forgetting things. They're asking whether there are people in your home who might be suffering. It's important from a health perspective because it will guide our efforts. I'm leading an effort on brain research now to try to help us think through how we can develop more appropriate efforts to head off some of these challenges. But the idea that we don't want to ask a couple 100,000 citizens a question about something so that we can better plan for a country of 300 million, the idea that filling out a few pieces of paper is too much to be asked for your country to help create a better union of a citizen, I think citizens would welcome. In fact, the reason why you don't have to find anyone is people do fill out the form. But we know something with a certainty. The idea that we're going to lead the greatest country in the world with less information about the conditions of communities and of our families, and that we're going to do that appropriately defies logic. It's intellectually dishonest. Now, we have done this survey for a very long time as a country. I suspect we'll continue to do it. But for whatever reason we're here today debating this, I welcome the debate, and at least for myself and for my caucus, we stand in opposition. I'd be glad to yield.
As I understand it, the American Community Survey is authorized by law and has been upheld by the courts. the ACS is authorized under Title 13 U.S. Code, the Census Act. On numerous occasions, the courts have judged that the Constitution gives Congress the authority to collect data on characteristics of the population in the census. As early as 1870, the Supreme Court characterized as unquestionable the power of Congress to require both an enumeration and the collection of data in the census. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding, and reclaiming my time. Any of the members who are going to run in a competitive race without doing any polling, I assume they'll be voting for this. For those who want information, I think that in order to make good decisions, the government needs this information. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma rise?
I move to strike the last word, please.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Here's this wonderful thing that would occur. You would open your mail one day, and you would have a packet in there, and you begin reading through these questions, and your first thought would be, is this real, or is this a scam artist trying to steal my information? Then you would call some office, or it gives you a website to contact just so you can see that this is really true. Because this is not like the long form that just came to your mailbox. This is the American Community Survey. And what just landed in your mailbox, if you refuse to answer it, someone will call you, and then they'll call you, and then they'll call you, and then they'll show up at your door and check on you why you haven't done it. Because this is not like the long form of the census that's gathering basic information. This is incredibly personal information. And if we can ask these questions as a federal government, it begs the issue of what questions can we not ask of someone from the federal government, because the federal government does not have the authority to walk into every house in America and ask any question they want to ask about any private activity. While it's been upheld that we can do the long form, this is distinctly different than the long form, and this is new. This is something that just transitioned in the last couple of years, and I get all kinds of calls in my office saying, what is this, and why are you asking for this? 3 quick things on it. I think this is incredibly inappropriate, because it asks way too much personal information on it. I think, second of all, it's incredibly inefficient. This form costs the federal government $67 per person that fills it out. Now, I can assure you, I've heard lots of people talking about polling data and about doing surveys. I don't know of anyone in politics, anyone in America, that pays $67 per survey that is filled out other than the federal government. $67 per. I will yield as soon as let me finish up. I'd be glad to have a colloquy about it. So this is incredibly inefficient in the way that we're gathering it. There are cheaper ways to be able to gather. Much of this information is already publicly available anyway. It just doesn't connect it to an individual person. The third thing on this is it's incredibly invasive. Now, let me just run through some of the questions. We've highlighted a few of them, but let me just hit a couple of the high points I get a chance to talk to. It's not just a few things about your age and about your location. It also asks, do you have hot and cold running water? Do you have a flush toilet? Do you have a bathroom, a bathtub, or a shower? Do you have a sink with a faucet? Do you have a stove or a range? Do you have a refrigerator? Do you have telephone service? How many automobiles, vans, or one-ton vehicles do you have in your home? Let me keep going. About how much do you think the house or apartment would sell for if you were to sell it right now? What's the annual payment for your fire hazard and flood insurance on this property? How much is the regular monthly payment on your second mortgage for this property if you have one? Is the person that lives in this home a United States citizen? How about this one? How well does the person in this home speak English? Where did this person live a year ago, and give the address for that? Because of mental, physical, or emotional condition, does this person have serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, and making decisions? Does this person have difficulty dressing or bathing? How many times has this person been married? Does this person have his or her own grandchildren, 18 or younger, living in the home? It gets better. How many people, including this person, rode together to work last week? How many times did this person actually leave the home, and what time did they leave the home to go to work last week? Last week, was this person laid off from their job? When did this person last work, even for a few days? What was your income in the last 12 months? And not a range, the actual listed income. Did you have any interest from dividends, rental income, royalties, any public assistance or welfare payments that did you receive? It goes on and on and on. This is not just a few simple questions. This is a form that if I walked up to anyone in this chamber and said, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I'm going to write these down. Tell me first your income. Then let's go to, do you have dividends? Do you have royalties? Do you have a bathtub or a shower? You would look at me and say, go away, which is what thousands of people in America are saying to this survey. This exceeds what we should ask as Americans. Without a big lie. Yes, I would.
Any one of millions of Americans, and we have an increase this week of people filing for new mortgages, have answered all of those questions plus some. But so if you think it's strange that people have to answer questions, if they can do it for a bank, they can maybe do it for their country. But here's my question. You said this was new and it hadn't been done before. This was fully implemented in 2005 under President Bush. So why would you stand on the House? I mean, I don't understand. This is not new. It was done.
Let me reclaim my time.
Okay.
Yes, sir, it is. We started in 2005 and started rolling it out a few at a time, experimenting with it, and now I've increased it. In fact, the administration has asked for 50,000 more a month and has actually asked for